Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom stand as testaments to the ancient Khmer Empire that once dominated mainland Southeast Asia. But not all ancient states that once thrived in mainland Southeast Asia left behind megalithic structures. In fact, some of the states did not leave behind any engineering feats, but still predated the builders. And one of these early states is the state of Funan. What do the Etruscans, the Minoans, and the Mesopotamians have in common? They were all built over by larger, more popular civilizations. The Romans built over the Etruscans, the Greeks built over the Minoans, and the Syrians, Akkadians, and Persians are among the many that built over the Mesopotamians. This is why so little is known about the societies that existed before the more popular builders, and also why they are usually discovered later on under the ruins of megalithic builders. This is exactly the case for Funan, which has only been rediscovered recently, finally shifting the focus of mainland Southeast Asian archaeology from the vast complexes of Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom to an earlier but equally impressive state. The state of Funan is one of the earliest states of mainland Southeast Asia. In fact, it existed so long ago that there's barely anything left of it, mostly due to the moist tropical climate of mainland Southeast Asia that may have decayed much of what it left behind. Very little has been recovered from Funan, which is why most of what is known about the ancient state comes from the records of foreign societies which outlived the forgotten state. Most of what is known about Funan, and most of what we will be discussing about Funan, come from the records of a Chinese maritime mission headed by Kang Dia and Zhu Ying. Even the name of Funan is thought to have been a Chinese version of Phnom, which is the Khmer word for hill. These records were only confirmed when exhibitions to mainland Southeast Asia, like that of Paul Paris, found canals that seemed to echo those described in the Chinese records. The origins of Funan is very much unknown, although it is likely that the people of Funan, or sometimes called the Funanese, were a highly Indianized society of Khmer people. Much of what is known about them comes from ancient foreign powers, which may have had a very biased opinion toward those who are not one of them. The leading theory, which to be honest sounds more like a myth, that is corroborated by both Indian and Chinese sources, goes something like this. The people who inhabited Funan before the founding of the Funan state were, according to the Chinese sources, curly-haired, dark people who went about their lives naked. Although it is highly likely that the people were as they were described, it seems rather a recurring theme for ancient powers to look at outsiders as uncivilized barbarians. Yes, I'm looking at you, ancient Greece. Indian sources added that they were pirates. Unfortunately, it is unlikely that they were as awesome as Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. The Indian story goes on to speak of a people who once inhabited Ok Ayo, which I'm probably mispronouncing by the way. They were said to have attacked, raided, and looted the Indian ships and Chinese ships passing by the trade routes, and if Chinese sources are to be believed, they did all this whilst naked, which seems highly unlikely because they should have eventually gotten a hold of clothes from all those ships that they were raiding. Eventually, an Indian prince or lord, or just some Indian guy of high birth, came to Funan and married a princess, thus bringing civility to a people which, according to them, were once uncivilized. In a dark twist of irony, this is eventually what the British will do to India. The Indian of high birth, who is said to be named or entitled Kaundinya, was said to have convinced the Funanese to stop raiding the trading ships and instead engage in trade with them, persuading them that they have more to gain from this than from the acts of piracy that they have been committing. Thus, the highly Indianized Khmer state of Funan was born, a state that is said to have traded with the rest of the Malay world, India, and China, with artifacts that originated as far east as Japan and as far west as Rome. Based on the records and recent archaeological studies, Funan is dated to have existed from 100 CE to 500 CE, but the sites associated with the Funanese may have been inhabited since the prehistoric times. What do all the great ancient civilizations have in common? That's right, rivers. Most ancient civilizations blossomed around rivers and their fertile valleys. Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates, Egypt and the Nile, China and the Yellow River are just some of the ancient states founded in river valleys. This is a pattern that has carried through to modern times, with most major cities and capitals still rising on the banks of the rivers that once enriched the ancient states that occupied what are now urban jungles. Manila and the Pasig, Paris and the Seine, London and the Thames are just some examples of these modern cities. This pattern of settling in river valleys is a result of many factors, but mainly due to the increased agricultural productivity promoted by rivers and their annual seasonal flooding. Besides the agricultural advantages of rivers, another reason why people may have settled along rivers is due to the transportation and trade it allowed. Rivers made it significantly easier to move from one part of the state to another. People could travel efficiently, and things can be moved around with ease. Some of the things that were sailed down rivers may have been the agricultural produce and the surplus made with the help of the fertile river valleys. But in some states, even megalithic rocks were moved with the use of rivers. A great example of this are the ancient Egyptians who moved giant blocks of stone from quarries to building sites which were often hundreds of kilometers away. Like the many other ancient civilizations, Funan also found itself situated along the banks of a river, but not just one river. Funan is located along the Mekong and the Basak River, somewhere between modern-day Vietnam and Cambodia. The Mekong itself is a primary waterway that's used all throughout most of mainland Southeast Asia, allowing for anyone with access to benefit from not only its fertile floodplains, but also trade. The Mekong is still vital to economies of mainland Southeast Asian countries in modern times. Rivers may have made it easier to travel from one point of the state to another, but oceans made it possible to travel from one state to virtually anywhere else in the globe. Funan combined both the advantages of river access and ocean access by settling along the delta of both the Mekong and the Basak rivers. The mixture of salty and ocean water and fresh river water makes it for a very nutrient-rich area, which may have allowed for an even greater agricultural productivity than any other river valley. This access to the ocean is probably what allowed for the pirating activities of the pre-Indianized Funanese, and it later allowed them to thrive and trade with all the ships passing along the maritime trade routes of the Chinese and the Indians. Many of the popular ancient states and civilizations left in their wake marvelous cities that have remained as ruined testaments to their greatness. One of the most famous examples of these ruined cities is the city of Pompeii. It gave a rather colorful image of ancient Rome. Unfortunately, this is not the case for Funan, since there's been very little sites that have been found, and most of the archaeological remains found are not enough to give us a clear image of what Funan was like. However, if we combine the Chinese records and the recent archaeological findings, it is possible to infer that Funan may have been a state of walled settlements, with palaces for rulers and houses built upon piles to keep everyone dry when the Mekong and Basak River flooded, thus replenishing and enriching the soil. Aerial reconnaissance done by Paul Paris and his team have found what could possibly be the remnants of canals crisscrossing the delta. These canals may have been used for the transportation purposes of a highly trade-involved people, or it could have been also used for irrigation of a highly agricultural-dependent people. Nevertheless, it proves that the existence of a highly complex society capable of not only harnessing nature's abundance, but also manipulating nature to benefit themselves. Expeditions by Louis Malleret, Vo Sikai, and Pierre-Yves Manguin confirmed Chinese reports when they found remnants of a large rectangular city in Ok-Ayo, which is where the Chinese records say the Funanese settled within this large city. Within this large city are remains of what possibly could have been a brick temple and workshops that hint at specialization. The artifacts recovered from these workshops seem to point towards jewelry production and metal casting. Also found within the city limits are evidence of wooden piles which may have supported houses. Malleret is also credited for a curious find in Ok-Ayo. Malleret recovered what seemed to be Roman coins, but recent studies suggest that these were merely imitations made by the Funanese based on what they saw in India or from Indian traders who were trading with Rome. However, this find still lead many to believe that Funan may have been Kattigara, which was identified by the Alexandrian geographer by the name of Claudius Ptolemy. Another site that is associated with Funan is named Angkor Borei, which is another walled city that is believed to have been the major center of Funan. This site matches the inland capital of Funan described by the Chinese reports in both location and size. Vietnamese scholars also discovered remains of a brick temple and brick vaults containing cremated human remains, and artifacts which include leaves inscribed with multitudes of motifs, most of which are inspired by Indian culture. The inscriptions on the golden leaves include women, deities, turtles representing Vishnu and Garuda, water buffaloes, elephants, snakes, conch shells, the sun, houses on piles, plants, Hindi gods. Other artifacts that were found were gold discs and gold rings and gold flowers. Jewelry fashioned from precious stones and glass were also found, all of which make it highly likely that Funan engaged in not just trade, but serious trade with India and China, which may have led to a wealthy and thriving coastal riverine state. We already discussed the geographical location of Funan and its implications on trade, but let's dig deeper on how the piracy turned diplomacy transformed Funan from a humble community of naked pirates to a highly organized state of traders. Trade was believed to have been such a dominant industry in Funan that it is now believed to have allowed for long-distance trade between the East and the West years before the first caravans even traveled the Silk Road. The location of Funan on the delta of the Basak and the Mekong River allowed them to benefit from the trade going up and down the mainland Southeast Asia. It is possible that the Funanese may have even controlled the trade entering and exiting through the rivers. It may have been this trade between the states along the Mekong that allowed Funan to thrive, since the Mekong goes as far inland as the Tibetan Plateau in China. Yes, the Mekong may as well have been the lifeline of mainland Southeast Asia, as it acted as a world trade center centuries before anyone even dreamt up the Twin Towers. The coastal location of Funan allowed it to engage in trade with China and India, who established maritime trade routes along the coast of mainland Southeast Asia. This trade with China and India is probably the way that the artifacts from Rome and Japan ended up in Funan, since at these times India may have already been trading with Rome and China may have already been trading with Japan. Sources also point to a system of taxation which the rulers of Funan may have enforced on both the citizens and the multitude of foreign traders that came to Funan. The taxes that were paid involved gold, silver, pearls, and even perfume. As stated earlier, the sites associated with Funan may point towards work specialization. The workshops found point to the probability of skilled workers focusing on the production of only certain products. Some of the specializations that may have existed in Funan include metalworking, engraving, and jewelry production. A state that finds itself at the crossroads, or in Funan's case, cross-maritime trading routes of major powers like India and China, will of course draw power from controlling said maritime trading routes. This access to the routes did not only give them the opportunity to engage in trade with the ships, but also to monopolize any further trade that would go along the Mekong and the Basak River. Funan could literally gatekeep both rivers as a means of trade, transportation, since they control the deltas of both, allowing them to control and possibly tax the traders and goods that were being brought further inland through the rivers. The state itself exercised power over its people as seen in the taxation that they may have implemented. And in terms of social stratification, we can assume that it existed due to the evidence of specialization which may have allowed for the difference in wealth accumulation. Furthermore, trade may have also allowed some to not only accumulate surplus but also imported goods. Since Funan is highly Indianized, it is likely that they adopted a similar political system and social stratification that is seen in the Indic kingdoms. However, the extent of such an adoption cannot be known for sure since there's little evidence to show how closely Funan's social organization mirrored that of the Indic kingdoms that were highly stratified based on the caste system. However, it is likely that the Funanese also adapted Hinduism, which may result in a caste system the same way it did in India. Hinduism and Buddhism's heavy influence on the states of mainland Southeast Asia can still be seen today in the motifs and images depicted in the extant ancient sites like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. These were the sites built by the Khmer Empire, which rose to power years after the fall of Funan, so we cannot know for sure if Funan also adopted foreign religions to the same extent as their successors. Sources also say that the influence of India goes beyond just the adoption of Indian culture. A representative of the Indian Moronda king was said to have been present in the courts of the Funanese kings. The Funanese also found it advantageous to adapt other Indian traits, such as the use of the Sanskrit language and the use of Indian royal titles. The Chinese records also speak of a succession of rulers with Indianized names that fought predatory wars against their neighbors. These rulers often had Indic names like Jayavarman and Rudravarman, which come from the Sanskrit title Varman, and the queenly names like Kulaprabhavati. In many ancient civilizations, being accused of a crime is practically tantamount to a death sentence, and it is no different in Funan. The preferred way to determine guilt or innocence in Funan is believed to have been by going through a trial. These trials probably left the accused permanently injured or may have even killed him. By the way, if you died, you were guilty. In a method reminiscent of the European witch hunts, the legal system of Funan is believed to have been based on trial by ordeal, or in other words, time to pray for a quick death. Trial by ordeal subjects any accused to a painful experience to determine guilt or innocence. These painful experiences may range from unpleasant to downright dangerous. Basically, whether you're found guilty or innocent, you'll be leaving your trial with scars, both physical and emotional. The results of these trials by ordeal were often interpreted as reflections of the judgment of a supernatural power. As I've already stated, the Funanese are believed to have adapted the Indian Sanskrit language, as seen in the various seals bearing brief texts in Indian Brahmi script. Although it is possible that these seals were traded into Funan instead of being written in Funan, it is still likely that the highly Indianized state did in fact adapt Sanskrit language. I mean, if it works, right? Like most ancient states that once ruled vast swaths of land and fought predatory wars against their neighbors, it must all come to an end. I mean, the Funanese probably adapted Hinduism, or at least are familiar with it, so karma must not have been much of a shock to them. However, Funan's decline happened less violently in the demise of their enemies. The state of Funan suffered from rapid decline caused by the establishment of the Silk Road. When China established terrestrial trade routes, they began to increasingly bypass the maritime trade routes that put Funan on the map in the first place. And this decline in trade eventually led to a decline of the state of Funan as a whole. This transfer of trade routes inland also drew centers of power inland, thus establishing the inland agrarian states like Chenla. Although the ultimate fate of the people of Funan is unknown, it is probable that they just moved inland as well and assimilated into the agrarian states coming into power. And just like that, the once thriving trade state of Funan was left to rot in the humid forests of mainland Southeast Asia, only to be rediscovered hundreds of years later with only so little of it left behind. Or so you may think. Despite the very little remnants left behind, Funan has still managed to have a significant impact on mainland Southeast Asian archaeology, and archaeology in general. It was previously thought that the Silk Road was the first major trade route that connected east to west, with the goods moving along the inland trade route making journeys as far as the distance between China and Rome. But with the recent discoveries made in Funan, archaeologists are starting to realize that this might not be the case after all. Funan stands as a testament to an even earlier maritime trade route that connected east to west, allowing not only for the movement of resources but also the spread of culture and ideas, a spread that is still evident all throughout mainland Southeast Asia today. Most of the information that I presented was taken from Charles Hiham's Encyclopedia of Ancient Asian Civilizations. I also supplemented Hiham's work with some information from the article The Kingdom of Funan, the First Great Southeast Asian Empire, written by Colin McKay for thephucetnews.com.